Twilight Gets a Puppy. By TDR. Chapter 35. Apple Bark Season. 1 month after Princess Luna's return. Late summer. Big Mac was not a happy pony. In fact, due to an accident involving a lost bet and a girdle, he was a fairly injured pony. A few bruised ribs from that incident that he didn't care to think of were going to be keeping him out of the field for a while. But that was only part of his issue. The farm had a bumper crop of apples this season, that would be good in the long run. The farm wasn't hurting, particularly with the declaration of it being a pony heritage site. But the bits weren't rolling in just yet. The little bonus from the sale in Canterlot had gone pretty much completely to getting dresses made for Apple Bloom and Granny Smith for the gala. After the harvest they would be set for the winter and a bit more, probably even pulling into the black far enough to splurge on a few worn-out necessities. Though they needed to get through the harvest first, and therein lay the issue. A crop like this would work both the siblings and Apple Bloom after school to the bone normally if all three were available. But Apple Bloom was to focus on school first, and as such she'd only have a few hours a day to help save on weekends. He and Applejack would be taking the brunt of it. Except now he was hurt and on doctor's orders not to do anything for at least a month, and Granny was too old to do any bucking. Which only left Applejack working the fields. This was far too much for one pony. But of course his sister wouldn't listen, she was the stubborn sort. It was not as if they could hire any real help either. Sweet Apple Acres was notorious for not hiring temp workers as they could never afford it before. So when the season started, most of the help that lived in Ponyville had left for greener and more profitable pastures for the season. He could ask her friends, and with the exception of Rarity he expected they would all help out. Though he would prefer if Fluttershy didn't. Last time she helped, the critters she brought to assist ate half of the crop and tore up a few trees in the process. Granny still went for her gun the moment she even thought she saw a beaver. Really, they should take that old Minotaur blunderbuss from her, but no one was yet brave enough to try to take her pappy's gun away from Granny. Getting Rainbow Dash to help wouldn't be easy either. That Pegasus was notoriously lazy, and he expected she had a bit of a thing for him. He didn't want to go down that route just in case she got it into her head to trade for a date. Not that she didn't look good, but there was only so much Wonderbolt talk he could take. That left Pinkie Pie and that new mare, Twilight, and her brothers. Twilight was the better one to ask. Pinkie was the sort who might blow every pony up, or rub soup in every pony's manes. It was always a toss-up. Still, he wasn't sure how to approach Twilight, and it was the first day of the season, so perhaps Applejack might get over her stubbornness and ask some pony for help on her own. Big Mac snorted. And monkeys might fly out of his butt. Asterisk. Ponyville. Ross winced as he hit the floor, a whine escaping his lips as he rubbed his head where it hit the wood. His ears perked as he heard the sound of books and other objects falling off the shelves upstairs and the annoyed yelling of Spike. Pushing himself to his paws, he took note that his bed was dancing across the floor and he was having a hard time staying balanced. Dropping to all fours, he started up the steps from his and Spike's shared room, which had been the library's basement. The place only had the one room upstairs, and Twilight had claimed that given how high it was. Stupid unicorn nesting tendencies. Pegasi were bad enough, but unicorns also seemed to have need to live as high above everything else as possible, towers, multi-story houses, and so on, all with the bedrooms at the top. While he understood it, as he liked high places as well, he had lost the rock-paper-scissors match with Twilight for control of the room. Why didn't he realize she was going to throw rock? The whole library was shaking by the time he got up the steps. Spike was vibrating around on the floor trying to gather up the books that kept falling off the shelves. The little Drake was growling under his breath as he couldn't keep on his feet. "Woof!" Ross asked, yawning. "'Bout time you got up, help me out here. We spent the last 2 weeks fixing the library and now everything's falling." Spike snapped. "Bark. No, I don't know what's going on." Spike winced as a book fell and bounced off his head. Ross yawned and went up the stairs, the second-floor balcony, to take a look over the town. A slight breeze blew through his navy fur, making him sigh a little. It was still far too hot for him, but the bit of wind helped. In the distance he could see a cloud of dust rising from the other side of the river, though from here he couldn't tell what it was. Picking up his sister's telescope as the shaking stopped, he angled it down to see what was going on before looking through it. Wait, no, that was Mrs. Thorwald's bedroom window. Was that her wedding ring on the dresser? Never mind, she supposedly just went on a trip. Ross readjusted the scope. A few ponies were gathered by the bridge, including the mayor and Twilight. Applejack was on the other side of the river talking with a herd of cows. He didn't know what was being said, though the cows dispersed not long after Applejack spoke with them. Ross frowned, noting Winona was with Applejack. He was leery of that dog after their first meeting. She had tried to hump his leg right after she shoved her nose to his butt. Ross sighed, turning to head back downstairs to help Spike. He'd ask Twilight about it later. *. 1 week later. Ross looked around the town, rather impressed with the setup for the party. He had been a little surprised that the stampede had happened, let alone that it was a real threat. The bridge wasn't that big after all, and probably would have fallen apart had the cows tried to cross it. So really Applejack had saved the cows and a bridge, not the town. His observation was not a popular one. Spike disagreed for another reason and thought Applejack should have turned them away sooner, as he had spent several more days fixing the library again. Still, Ross was most impressed with his sister. She had not only helped set up the party, but was currently adjusting her notes on the stage to give a speech in front of every pony. And it was only a few cue cards too. Oh wait, she had more in her saddlebag. And more in her other saddlebag. Ross glanced behind him at the crowd. Half these ponies were gonna be asleep by the time his sister was done. Welcome every pony. Today we are here to honor a pony we can always count on to help with matters great and small. Twilight flipped the card over as Ross and Spike groaned. Of course they would be double-sided. A pony whose contributions. Twilight jerked back as Rainbow Dash suddenly dropped out of the sky, knocking her cards aside, hogging the mic. Did you see Applejack's slick moves out there? Rainbow Dash squealed. What an athlete. This week she's gonna help me with my new flying trick, and I know it's gonna be super awesome. Exactly. Twilight snapped, shoving Rainbow out of her way, collecting her cue cards again. Before she could say anything, Pinkie Pie popped up between her and the podium, scattering Twilight's cards again. This week I get to run Sugar Cube Corner for the first time. Pinkie Pie grinned. What does that have to do with Applejack? Twilight demanded. Pinkie looked at Twilight confused a moment before perking up. Oh, Applejack, one of the best bakers ever, is gonna help me. Applejack makes everything great, so free samples for every pony. That announcement brought a number of cheers from the crowd. Okay, that's great. Now if I can just make a point without being interrupted. Twilight grumbled, shoving Pinkie Pie off the stage as she collected her cue cards again. Only for Fluttershy to tug on her forelimb. Twilight slapped her face with a hoof as Fluttershy started talking. Twilight, I'm so sorry for interrupting. Fluttershy stated. But I just wanted to say Applejack is also helping me this week with the official bunny census, where we count up all the new baby bunnies that were born this season. She's going to help me gather them using her wonderful herding skills. Ross's ears perked up at the mention of bunnies and he couldn't help lick his lips. Thankfully Fluttershy didn't see that. Anyone else? Anyone? No. Twilight shouted as Fluttershy slunk off stage again, letting Twilight gather her cards once more. As I was trying to say. Twilight blinked, looking over as Mayor Mare smiled wide at her. Arg. Twilight tossed the cards in the air. Spike and Ross took this moment to start clapping and cheering, only for Twilight to once more gather the stack of cards in her magic and pelt her brothers with them as she stormed off the stage. Ross and Spike giggled as their sister joined them. I hate you both so much right now. Twilight growled. Bark. You're right, I hate everything so much right now. Twilight agreed. Hey, you managed to make it to a party on your own without freaking out, Spike smirked. I'd say that's a plus. I suppose you're right. Twilight sighed, looking up as the mayor yanked back the curtain to reveal nothing. Everyone stared a moment before a few ponies started to panic, recalling the Nightmare Moon incident. Applejack's gone. Pinkie Pie gasped. There had better not be another evil pony trying to take over the world showing up. Twilight groaned. Bet it's a villainous farmer. Spike chuckled. The pairs shall last forever. Spike, Pinkie Pie, and Ross both start cackling at the idea while Twilight gave a long-suffering sigh. Applejack took that moment to stumble up through the crowd. I am here, I am here. Twilight blinked, noting the bushels of apples she was carrying with her and the bags under her eyes. Her brothers stopped laughing as they saw that as well. Whoa! She looks like Twilight at level 2, Spike stated as Ross nodded. I don't think I look that bad. Twilight frowned. Applejack yawned, shoving the mayor out of the way. Miss Mayor, thank ya kindly for this here award thingy. Applejack moved over to the award. It's so bright and shiny and, well, I sure do look funny. The crowd turned to look at each other as Applejack bobbed her head, making woo-woo noises, staring at her reflection in the trophy. Level 3. Spike winced. Bark. Ross agreed as Twilight rolled her eyes. We need to help her. Spike stated. I'm sure she's fine. Twilight uttered as if trying to convince herself. With a couple more woos, that Pinkie joined in on, Applejack stopped. Well, thank you for helping with that scary stampede, Mayor stated. Sure thing, I like helping the pony, with stuff, the orange mare muttered before dozing off where she stood. Applejack? The mayor asked. What? Oh right. Applejack gasped. Right back to work. The crowd parted a little as Applejack dragged the trophy off stage with a thud and across the dirt as she headed back to her farm. Okay, maybe I should talk to her. Twilight frowned. Asterisk. 2 hours later. So how'd it go? Spike asked as Twilight grumbled. She's working herself to exhaustion trying to harvest all the apples on her own. Twilight stated. Woof. Ross asked, standing up from where he had been sitting, going to get his coat, ready to leave. Of course I have a plan. Twilight sighed. We let her work herself to the point of collapse, then go in there and help her when she can't fight back or refuse. Spike and Ross tilted their heads looking at their sister. What? Twilight snapped. She's super stubborn and refused my offer of help. She's insisting that she can do it herself. So we let her try. It's not like we can go over there and help her now. She'd spend even more energy arguing with us or maybe even trying to run us off the farm. So what are we gonna do? Spike asked. I'm going to get a few books and read up on apple farming, that way I can be ready to help her with whatever she needs once she gets over herself. Twilight grumbled. I just hope she'll call it quits before someone gets hurt. There was a loud crash as Rainbow Dash smashed through a window, slamming into Ross and sending both of them tumbling backwards into a bookcase, sending books flying everywhere. Seriously? Spike cursed. Woof. Ross whimpered. Oh, you're fine. Is that Rainbow Dash? Twilight asked, lifting the bookcase off her brother and friend. Ow, Rainbow Dash whimpered. Can I help you? Twilight questioned. I think there's some other pony who needs help. Rainbow Dash muttered from where she had landed on Ross's back. Applejack. Twilight deadpanned. Yup. Rainbow Dash sighed. As a side note, your brother is really warm, fluffy, and comfortable. Ross whimpered as the Pegasus poked her hoof against his back. Asterisk. The next day. We got here as soon as we could. Twilight stated with Ross and Spike right behind her. Nurse Redheart sighed. Thank goodness, we need all the help we can get. The mayor pulled aside the curtain of the hastily set up field hospital, showing a multitude of ponies laying on cots or on the ground, the sound of retching filling the air. Ross was very glad he was upwind given how many buckets were full. What happened? Twilight demanded, her horn glowing as she scanned one of the ponies. Something was wrong with the baked goods. Nurse Redheart stated. Not baked goods. Pinkie Pie moaned from one of the beds. Baked bads. Spike and Ross took note of a tray of muffins on the table, each of them picking one up to look at it. The pair of them popped the muffins into their mouths, chewing a bit before swallowing it. Nurse Redheart looked a little freaked out, though Twilight just rolled her eyes. Well, she demanded. Woof. Ross stated. No magic, but it has meat. Twilight blinked. There's also a hint of potato and a sweet aftertaste I can't place. Spike commented. Like caramelized soda. Well, that's enough to start treatment, I suppose. Redheart blinked, sticking her tongue out in disgust as the pair went for another of the muffins. Meat isn't going to kill anyone, but it explains why every pony is sick if there's a lot of it. You want one, Twilight? Spike asked. How did this happen? One of the other nurses fussed. Applejack. Twilight growled, ignoring Spike. Asterisk. The next day. Twilight frowned as she walked back into town, having yet again been run off by Applejack. Seriously, that mare was getting on her nerves. The purple unicorn froze as she looked around town. Several ponies were laying on the street whining. The horror, the horror. It was a disaster, a horrible disaster. Twilight blinked, looking around the town and seeing nothing wrong. I don't get it. Every flower destroyed. Our livelihood eaten. By them. Twilight turned away from the flower trio to look down the street where they were pointing. A large herd of rabbits was hopping about, with Fluttershy darting amongst them, trying to get the bunnies to go home. All right, that's it. Twilight cursed, hearing someone walk up behind her. A glance back showed Spike and Ross, the latter seeming far too content with himself. Twilight blinked, then slapped her forehead with a hoof. How many do I need to tell Fluttershy to count off her census? Woof. Ross smirked. 8. Twilight sighed again. I do not look forward to that conversation. Well, there is good news. Spike offered. Dare I ask? Twilight's ears drooped. Big Mac came by while you were out. Spike stated as Twilight whirled around to face her brothers. What, he did? Did he say anything about me, I mean? What did he say? Twilight's ears perked up, though she changed her tone to try and act dismissive. Ross wasn't buying it and started laughing, at least until Twilight kicked him in the stomach to shut him up as her face turned even more red. Spike continued on, simply ignoring the two of them. He asked us to help Applejack. So even if she says no now, we can ignore her. Great, I have a number of sleep spells I can hit her with while we take care of things. Twilight grinned. Ross, go see if Pinkie Pie has recovered and get Rainbow Dash too. Fluttershy is gonna be a bit busy, though maybe Rarity. Woof. Ross nodded, heading off to find Pinkie Pie. Seriously, sleep spells? Do we need that? Spike winced. She poisoned half the town, hit your brother with Rainbow Dash, and sent a stampede of bunnies running through Ponyville. We are past the point where her stubbornness has gotten ponies hurt. Twilight snarled, marching off towards the farm with Spike waddling along with her. Asterisk. All right, Applejack, enough is enough. Twilight stormed up the hill with her brothers in tow to where a barely coherent Applejack was kicking at a tree. Your apple bucking hasn't just caused you problems. It's overpropelled a Pegasus, partially poisoned plenty of ponies, and blatantly blanched brand new bushels of bouncing baby bunnies. Twilight shoved her face forward, getting nose to nose with Applejack. You need help. With the last kick on the tree Applejack was working on, a group of apples fell into the panniers on her back, and the weary orange pony looked up at the empty tree and grinned. Says you. That was the last tree, Ah said Ah could do it by myself, and Ah did it by myself. Applejack snapped back. So how do y'all like them apples? Eenapi. Big Mac stated, slowly walking up the hill before pointing behind him at the untouched north field. How do you like them apples? Applejack blinked, looking over at the much larger orchard, and promptly fainted. The four of them stood around her a moment before Spike smirked. She took that well, the baby dragon chuckled. Author's note. And time passes. We also see Twilight starting to fawn over a particular, large pony of the apple variety. Let's face it, she's not likely to have seen anything his size in Canterlot, so she's intrigued. There will be a epilogue chapter and the running joke continues. End author's note. End chapter 35. Apple Bark Season.